Frost painted intricate patterns across the train depot windows as bitter winds carved through the timber. Buildings of Cedar Falls. The harsh December air carried traces of burning pine and harsh whiskey from Murphy's Tavern down the muddy Main Street. Inside the establishment, a worn piano struggled against rowdy voices and the shuffle of gambling men seeking warmth from the storm. Beyond the covered platform, where locomotive steam still lingered like morning mist, a solitary figure waited. Emma Hartford pressed a weathered carpet bag against her woolen coat, her thin shawl offering little defense against the penetrating cold. She paced nervously between her boots, searching the empty street for someone who would never appear. Approaching the ticket window, she spoke to the clerk with measured composure despite her trembling hands. "Excuse me, sir? Jacob Mitchell arrived to collect me?" The clerk, a portly man with drooping whiskers and shifty eyes, paused uncomfortably. "Afraid he perished in a mining accident 3 days past," he announced, with the emotion of reading stock prices. The news hit like a physical blow. Emma's breath caught, her mouth opening soundlessly as the reality settled. Behind her, heavy footsteps echoed across the wooden planks. Coarse laughter erupted from a cluster of men stumbling from Murphy's establishment, their movements unsteady. "From afternoon drinking? Well, look what the railroad delivered," one shouted, his grin revealing gaps where teeth should be. Another man steadied himself against a post, leering openly. "Ordered goods nobody wants," he called out, spitting tobacco juice into the snow. Emma's heart raced as she retreated toward the freight wagon's shadow, longing for her father's reassuring presence from her memories in Pennsylvania. The wind changed direction suddenly. Measured hoofbeats, calm and purposeful, resonated through the settlement. From the swirling snow appeared a commanding figure astride a dark stallion. His long hair was secured with braided cord, his powerful frame wrapped in a weathered leather coat. His piercing gaze swept across the scene with quiet authority. The drunken men grew silent under his steady stare. The boldest among them retreated a step, mumbling to his companions. Without further confrontation, he shuffled back toward the tavern's yellow glow. The horseman dismounted, his boots crunching decisively in the fresh snow. He positioned himself before Emma, near enough for her to notice the thin scar tracing, his strong jawline. "The cold will claim you here," he stated matter-of-factly. "Ride with me." Emma's hesitation was visible. His features, his braided hair, the intricate beadwork decorating his coat identified him as Lakota. She recalled the frightening tales whispered throughout Pennsylvania, yet in his unwavering eyes she recognized something achingly familiar. Echo of her father's protective nature. The wind gusted forcefully enough to push her toward him. He removed his coat, a thick fur-lined garment, and placed it across her shoulders against the biting air. She examined the rich material, then met his gaze again. Slowly, she reached into her bag and withdrew a delicate lace handkerchief. She tied it carefully around her bag's leather handle. "For Papa," she whispered, more for herself than for him. His mouth curved slightly, the faintest suggestion of warmth. He brought his horse nearer, extending his hand upward. Emma accepted it, surprised by the strength and heat of his grasp. She settled into the saddle, feeling the leather creak beneath her. He mounted behind her, one arm positioned near her, waist not touching, yet creating a barrier against the wind. The stallion moved forward, hooves muffled by the deep snow. Murphy's piano grew distant, swallowed by the storm's voice and the soft breathing of their mount. Moonbeams pierced the cloud cover, transforming the white landscape into gleaming silver. For the first time since leaving the train, Emma felt a small spark of security. They traveled through the darkness, leaving Cedar Falls' flickering lights far behind. The Lakota village hours later. The black stallion transported them across the frozen wilderness until shadowy forms materialized through the falling snow. Round dwellings made of buffalo hide emerged, their surfaces powder white, smoke spiraling from openings at their tops. Firelight danced against the snow, glowing like scattered coals across the darkness. They entered the village circle as the wind softened to a gentle whisper behind the protective ridge. People appeared from their homesmen wrapped in thick buffalo robes. women with long braids cascading over their shoulders, children peeking from behind their mothers' skirts. Murmurs began immediately. "White woman brings misfortune," an elderly voice declared. Another woman shook her head disapprovingly. "Gosh, she has no place among us." At the gathering's center stood Dakota, the village chief. His face bore deep lines of wisdom, his dark eyes like polished stone. Though he didn't raise his voice, his commanding presence quieted those around him. He studied Emma at length, saying nothing before addressing Ayanna in their native tongue. A heated discussion in Lakota passed between them, words Emma couldn't comprehend, but their meaning was unmistakable. Opposition, Ayanna didn't argue. He simply guided the horse toward the camp's outer edge, where the central fire's warmth barely reached. There, a small unoccupied lodge awaited, its entrance flaps secured with leather ties. He dismounted and offered assistance down. "You may shelter here," he said. Stepping inside, she discovered a simple bedroll arranged beside a stone fire circle. The hide walls blocked the wind, though cold still permeated the air. Before she could respond, Ayanna vanished, returning shortly with a wooden bowl containing warm cornmeal cake. "For nourishment," he said simply, placing it on a small wooden block near her. Emma sat, breaking the bread into careful portions. She glanced at her dress, once practical blue wool now frayed at the edges, with seams stressed from weeks of travel. Her fingers located the small sewing pouch in her traveling bag. She bent over her work, mending by the dim light from the crackling fire pit. Occasionally her eyes drifted toward the shadow at the lodge opening. Outside, Ayanna tended his horse, running a cloth along its sides, examining the hooves. But his attention frequently wandered toward the small dwelling. When she finished the meal, she hesitated, then broke off a piece and left it on the block by the entrance flap. "For your generosity," she murmured to the quiet space later. As the village fires began to dim, Emma overheard voices outside. Tokota's deep, gravelly tone carried through the hide walls. "She will bring catastrophe. The white world always brings suffering." "She is abandoned," Ayanna replied, his voice steady but resolute. "The winter will destroy her." "You endanger us all," Tokota said. "Have you forgotten your sister?" The silence that followed felt heavy, interrupted only by the distant snap of burning wood. Emma's needlework stilled. She pressed her lips together, anxiety knotting in her stomach. She wanted to trust she wouldn't be cast into the cold. But the chief's words cut deeply. Minutes passed before a soft sound reached her, the gentle crunch of snow under boots. She lifted the lodge flap just enough to glimpse a tall figure standing beyond the entrance, Ayanna, arms crossed, gaze searching the darkness past the village perimeter. He didn't acknowledge her. He didn't need to. His steady, silent presence sent warmth through the frigid air. She let the flap drop and lay upon the bedroll, the small piece of cornmeal cake still resting on the block, untouched. Outside, the wind rose once more. But it no longer seemed quite as threatening. Morning lessons by dawn, the village was awakening. Smoke curling skyward from the central hearths. Emma emerged from her lodge as the cold air stung her face, watching the women kneel beside the flames, coaxing sparks into steady warmth. One woman handed her a bundle of kindling and gestured toward the fire circle. She crouched awkwardly at first, copying the methodical arrangement of twigs and bark chips. When her fire caught a thin stream of smoke rising into the pale morning sky, she felt a modest surge of accomplishment. That moment ended abruptly with a familiar voice.
"Acta!"
Tokota stood several paces away, arms folded, eyes stern. "Comes from White Touch," he said in English, his accent pronounced. "Keep it from our people." Emma froze, uncertain how to reply. But before the uncomfortable silence could extend, Ayanna appeared beside her. Without addressing the elder directly, he took a length of rope from his belt and nodded toward the tethered horses. She followed him. Relief flowing quietly but powerfully, he demonstrated how to loop the rope around the post, how to secure it, so it would hold even if the animal struggled. His hands moved with deliberate skill, and when she attempted it, her fingers clumsy in the cold. His larger ones brushed hers to guide the motion. She glanced up briefly and found his gaze already upon her. That evening, the hunting party returned with disturbing news that made the village atmosphere grow tense. A knife, its handle marked with crude engravings, had been discovered in the snow near the ridge. Ayana's expression hardened when he examined it. He spoke no words to her, but the set of his jaw conveyed enough. Dangerous men lurked nearby, and they were too close for comfort. When darkness settled, the villagers congregated around the central fire. Ayana sat apart, whittling something into a wooden post with his blade. Emma, seated nearby, began humming a melody from the east, a lullaby her mother once sang. The words emerged softly at first, then with growing confidence. Ayana looked up. His lips moved almost imperceptibly, following the tune, as though some portion of it wasn't entirely strange to him. For a moment they shared the same peaceful rhythm, fire casting their faces in golden light. When she rose to return to her lodge, she discovered the post beside her door now displayed a small carved flower. He stood there, still gripping the knife. "For peaceful sleep," he said simply, before walking away. Later, she took the handkerchief she had kept folded in her traveling bag, the one with the delicate white embroidery, placed it on the low block by his tent entrance. "For your skilled hands," she whispered to the still night, near evening's end. He approached the fire carrying a small loaf of bread. Without ceremony, he broke it and offered half to her. She hesitated only briefly before accepting it. Her fingers grazing the back of his hand, it was the first time she had touched him without fear. The warmth from his skin remained even as wolves began howling far across the plains. Their voices weaving through the fire's crackling. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. The warning, the alert, came on a day when the sky hung low and gray, the wind carrying more than winter's bite. A messenger from a neighboring settlement arrived with troubling information. A gang of outlaws, men notorious for robbing stagecoaches and burning homesteads, had been seen moving north. They were reportedly drinking in Murphy's Tavern just 2 nights earlier, boasting about taking Lakota horses for themselves. The village mood shifted. Men secured the bindings on their lodges, tested their weapons' edges. Women pulled children nearer. Emma heard the hushed conversations, caught words, like ridge and watch. She observed Ayana strap on his knife and bow, his movements purposeful, silent. When he rode out with 2 other men, Emma found herself lingering at the village edge, watching until the shapes of the horses disappeared into the snow. He returned at sunset, his pace slower than usual. Snow clung to his coat in a dark stain, spread along his sleeve. Emma saw him pause near his tent, flexing his arm as if to dismiss pain, before he could retreat inside. She approached, holding a strip of clean cloth she'd torn from her meager possessions. "Let me examine that," she said quietly. "It's minor," he replied, but she caught the tension around his mouth. She reached for his sleeve before she could reconsider. The fabric was stiff with partially frozen blood. Beneath it, a shallow gash ran along his forearm. "From the ridge?" she asked. He didn't respond, just watched her as she wrapped the cloth around the wound, securing it firmly. Her fingers brushed his skin warm despite the cold, and for an instant she saw something flicker in his eyes. Perhaps surprise at being cared for. The attack that night, the assault, came sooner than anyone anticipated. The first cries rose from the village's northern edge, followed by thundering hooves and the wild shouts of men charging. Snow sprayed in arcs under the horses' feet, and firelight gleamed off metal. Emma was still beside the central fire when a rough hand grabbed her arm. A man with a matted beard and reeking of whiskey dragged her toward the village edge, using her as protection while other outlaws dismounted, bellowing commands. "One false step, and she burns with the rest of you," he roared, toward the nearest Lakota warrior. Her heart hammered in her chest. But beneath the terror was something else, a determination not to be the weakness that brought them harm. Her gaze darted to a hanging oil lamp swaying from a wooden post near the lodge. She twisted her arm hard enough to make her captor stumble and seized the lantern. The man cursed, reaching for her, but she hurled the lantern to the ground at his feet. It exploded, flames leaping instantly as oil spilled into the snow. thick. Black smoke billowed upward, carried by the wind, toward the rest of the camp. It was sufficient. Warriors emerged from behind lodges, arrows notched, blades ready. The outlaws faltered, choking in the smoke. Through the chaos, Ayanna appeared, moving low and swift, his knife gleaming. He reached her side, pushing her behind him. For a moment, the world narrowed to the sound of his breathing and the hiss of fire. When the last of the bandits broke and fled into the night, the snow was trampled and soiled, smell of burned oil sharp in the air. Ayanna turned to her, his expression unreadable, then reached into his belt. He held out a small blade, the handle wrapped in worn leather. "For your courage," he said, her fingers closed around it, feeling the weight. It wasn't merely a weapon, it was trust. Later, as the village assembled to assess the damage, she noticed a tear in his coat stitching ripped from where he'd fought. Without asking, she fetched her needle and thread, kneeling beside him in the snow. "For your battle," she said softly, as she drew the needle through the fabric. He watched her hands, his gaze steady but quieter than usual, as though words might shatter something delicate between them. When the final seam was secured, the cold seemed to rush back. He stood, scanning the ridges for any sign of return, then his eyes met hers. No gratitude passed his lips. Yet in the charged stillness between them, the drifting smoke, the muffled voices of the villagers, and the faint whistle of the wind, she heard it all the same. The final confrontation the night following the attack. The air was brittle with cold, the snow reflecting the orange light of scattered fires still burning low from overturned oil lamps. The outlaws had scattered, but one figure remained tall, broad-shouldered. With a sneer that twisted at the edges of his scarred lips, he stood in the village center. A revolver at his hip, eyes fixed on Emma, as though marking her for future harm. Ayanna stepped forward from the line of warriors. No words passed between him and the man, but the challenge was unmistakable. The outlaw reached for his gun, yet Ayanna moved first, knocking the weapon into the snow with a sweep of his arm. The two closed in, their boots churning the frozen ground, the sounds of their struggle sharp in the still night. The outlaw swung hard, but Ayanna caught his wrist, twisting until the man dropped to one knee. Emma watched, heart pounding, torn between fear and the strange calm that came from knowing Ayanna was there. He moved with precision, every strike, controlled as though his strength was something he carried, not something he had to prove. When the outlaw finally lay in the snow, breathing raggedly, Ayanna knelt beside him. From the pouch at his belt, he took a strip of cloth and wrapped it around the man's bleeding hand. "Go," he said, his voice low, each word edged with steel. "Don't return." The man's eyes flicked to Emma once before he staggered away, disappearing into the dark beyond the ridge. Around them, the village stirred into motion. Flames licked the edges of one of the smaller lodges, and Emma didn't hesitate. She grabbed a bucket from the snowbank, scooped icy water, dashed it over the fire. Another bucket came her way from a young boy, and she worked in rhythm with the others, stamping out embers, beating sparks from the hide walls. Her hands stung from the cold, but she remembered what Ayanna had shown her about how snow could be packed to smother flames. She dropped to her knees, shoveling drifts into the fire's base until the smoke thinned to nothing. When it was finished, she straightened, breathing hard. Across the firelit clearing, she saw Tokoro watching her. His expression had shifted, not acceptance, but something closer to consideration. Still, his eyes held a reserve that told her trust would not come easily. Later, when the village had quieted and most had retreated to their lodges, Emma returned to her own. By the entrance, nestled in the snow, lay a small bundle of wildflowers, white and purple, their petals fragile against the cold. She crouched and touched them, amazed they had survived the frost. "For your bravery," Ayanna said from behind her. His voice was almost lost in the whisper of the wind. She turned, the flowers cradled in her hands. "And for your protection," she replied softly. From the belt of her dress, she pulled a thin strip of leather she had been saving, worn smooth by her fingers. She stepped close and tied it gently around his neck, letting it rest against the beaded collar of his coat. He looked down at the leather, then back at her, something unreadable flickering in his gaze. The moon climbed higher, casting silver over the snow. They stood in the quiet, the village breathing softly around them. For a moment, it felt as though the night had folded in, leaving just the two of them. Her hand found his without thought. His fingers closed over hers, warm and steady. The fight, the cold, the tension of the day, all of it softened in that single contact. She didn't know if this meant she would stay, or if the world beyond the ridge would still try to pull her away. But in that moment, he was the one fixed point she could trust. Ayanna held her gaze, the moonlight catching in his eyes. No promises were spoken, no vows exchanged, yet the space between them felt bound by something stronger than either could name. The wind shifted again, carrying the scent of wood smoke and snow. She tightened her hold on his hand, and he did the same, until it felt less like instinct and more like a choice. The choice. First sign of strangers came with the clatter of wagon wheels on frozen ground. The village stirred, weary eyes turning toward the figures emerging through the drifted snow. A finely dressed man and woman, their coats trimmed with fur, their boots spotless despite the road behind them. Horses glancing nervously at the ring of Lakota warriors who had come to meet them,